If you enjoy listening to horror stories before going to sleep, I kindly invite you to subscribe to the Scary Cat channel. Story number 30. As a child, I loved playing hide and seek with my friends. But one day, I found a hiding spot that I could never escape from. It was a small crawl space in the attic, and as soon as I crawled inside, the door slammed shut behind me. I could hear my friends calling my name, but I was trapped. And then, I heard something else, the sound of someone breathing in the darkness. I knew then that I was not alone. Story number 31. I always thought that the old mansion on the hill was just a relic of the past, but then I received an invitation to a dinner party there. As I sat at the table, surrounded by the other guests, I felt a chill run down my spine. And then, I saw her, a woman in a white dress, her hair falling over her face. She whispered something in my ear, and as I turned to look at her, I saw that her eyes were completely black. I knew then that I was in grave danger. Story number 32. I loved exploring old abandoned buildings, but one day, I found something that I wish I had never discovered. It was a room filled with dusty old books and strange artifacts. And then, I saw her, a woman in a red dress, her eyes burning with an otherworldly light. She spoke to me in a language that I couldn't understand, and as she approached me, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I knew then that I had opened a door to a world beyond my understanding. Story number 33. I always thought that the stories of people disappearing in the woods were just rumors, but then I went on a camping trip with my friends. As we sat around the campfire, we heard strange sounds coming from the darkness. And then, one by one, my friends started to disappear. I tried to run, but I couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching me from the shadows. It wasn't until later that I discovered the truth about what lurked in the woods. Story number 34. I had always been afraid of the old bridge that crossed the river, but one day, I decided to face my fear. As I walked across the creaky boards, I heard something whispering in my ear. It was a voice from beyond the grave, warning me to turn back. But I didn't listen, and as I reached the other side, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The bridge was filled with the ghosts of those who had died trying to cross it before me. Story number 35. I had always been fascinated by the idea of a cursed object, so when I found an old mirror at a yard sale, I couldn't resist buying it. At first, it seemed like an ordinary mirror, but then I noticed something strange. Every time I looked into it, my reflection seemed to be smiling, even when I wasn't. And then, one night, I saw something else in the mirror, a figure standing behind me, its eyes burning with an otherworldly light. I knew then that I had brought something evil into my home. Story number 36. As a child, I loved playing with my toys, but one day, I discovered that they were not what they seemed. They had a life of their own, and as I watched, they started to move on their own accord. And then, I heard them whispering in the darkness, calling out to me in voices that were not their own. I knew then that I was not alone in the room. Story number 37. I loved taking long walks in the countryside, but one day, I found myself lost in a maze of cornfields. As I walked through the tall stalks, I heard something moving in the darkness. And then, I saw them, scarecrows with twisted grins on their faces, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. They started to move closer, their straw arms reaching out to me. I knew then that I was not going to make it out of the maze alive. Story number 38. I had always been fascinated by the idea of a haunted painting, so when I found an old portrait at an estate sale, I couldn't resist buying it. At first, it seemed like an ordinary painting, but then I noticed something strange. Every time I looked at it, the expression on the subject's face seemed to change. And then, one night, I woke up to find the subject standing at the foot of my bed, its eyes burning with an otherworldly light. It spoke to me in a language that I couldn't understand, but I knew that it was not from this world. Story number 39. I always thought that the stories of haunted hospitals were just urban legends, but then I found myself in one. As I walked through the dark, empty halls, I heard strange sounds coming from the rooms. And then, I saw her, a ghostly figure in a nurse's uniform, holding a syringe in her hand. she spoke to me in a language that I couldn't understand, and as she approached me, I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I knew then that I was in the presence of something that was not of this world. Story number 40. I had always been afraid of the dark, but one night, I decided to face my fear. As I lay in bed with the lights off, I heard something moving in the shadows. And then, I saw her, a ghostly figure in a white dress, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. She spoke to me in a language that I couldn't understand, and as she approached me, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I knew then that I was not alone in the darkness. Story number 41. I loved exploring abandoned buildings, but one day, I found something that I wish I had never discovered. It was a room filled with strange machines and odd contraptions. And then, I saw him, a man in a lab coat, his eyes burning with an otherworldly light. He spoke to me in a language that I couldn't understand, and as he approached me, I realized that he was not from this world. He had been experimenting with things beyond human comprehension, and now he was ready to share his knowledge with me. Story number 42. I had always been afraid of the ocean, but one day, I decided to face my fear and go scuba diving. As I descended into the depths, I saw something moving in the darkness. And then, I saw them, a group of mermaids, their hair flowing in the currents, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. They spoke to me in a language that I couldn't understand, and as I listened, I realized that they were not what they seemed. They were creatures of the deep, and they had been waiting for someone like me to come along. Story number 43. I loved exploring the old catacombs beneath the city, but one day, I found something that I wish I had never discovered. It was a room filled with strange symbols and ancient artifacts. And then, I saw them, a group of cultists, their eyes burning with an otherworldly light. They spoke to me in a language that I couldn't understand, and as they approached me, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I knew then that I had stumbled upon something beyond my understanding. Story number 44. As a child, I loved playing with my imaginary friend, but one day, he became something more. He started to speak to me in a language that I couldn't understand, and as I listened, I realized that he was not from this world. He had been waiting for me to reach a certain age, and now he was ready to take me with him to his home planet. Story number 45. I always thought that the stories of haunted hotels were just urban legends, but then I found myself in one. As I walked through the empty halls, I heard strange sounds coming from the rooms. And then, I saw her, a ghostly figure in a white dress, her hair falling over her face. She spoke to me in a language that I couldn't understand, and as she approached me, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I knew then that I was in the presence of something that was not of this world. Story number 46. I loved exploring old abandoned mines, but one day, I found something that I wish I had never discovered. It was a tunnel that seemed to go on forever, and as I walked deeper into the darkness, I heard something moving behind me. And then, I saw them, a group of creatures with glowing eyes and sharp teeth, their claws scraping against the rocks. They spoke to me in a language that I couldn't understand, and as they closed in, I knew that I was not going to make it out alive. Story number 47. I had always been afraid of clowns, but one day, I found myself at a circus. As I watched the performers, I saw something strange. One of the clowns had eyes that seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. And then, I felt something brush against my leg. It was a balloon, but when I looked at it, I saw that it was not what it seemed. It was alive, and it was reaching out to me with its string. Story number 48. I loved exploring abandoned factories, but one day, I found something that I wish I had never discovered. It was a room filled with strange machinery and odd chemicals. And then, I saw him, a man in a hazmat suit, his eyes burning with an otherworldly light. He spoke to me in a language that I couldn't understand, and as he approached me, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I knew then that I had stumbled upon something beyond my understanding. Story number 49. I always thought that the stories of possessed dolls were just urban legends, but then I found one that was unlike any other. Its eyes seemed to follow me wherever I went, and every time I picked it up, I felt a strange sensation. And then, one night, I woke up to find the doll sitting at the foot of my bed, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. It spoke to me in a language that I couldn't understand, and as I listened, I realized that the doll was not what it seemed. It was possessed by something beyond my understanding. Story number 50. I love taking long walks through the city at night, but one night, I found myself in an unfamiliar part of town. As I walked through the dark alleyways, I heard something moving in the shadows. And then, I saw a figure in a long coat, his eyes burning with an otherworldly light. He spoke to me in a language that I couldn't understand, and as he approached me, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I knew then that I was in the presence of something that was not of this world. Story number 51. Samantha had always been afraid of the dark, but she never knew why. One night, as she was walking home from work, she felt like someone was following her. She quickened her pace, but the footsteps behind her grew louder. Finally, she turned around to face her stalker, but there was no one there. And then, she heard a whisper in her ear, "Don't turn around." She knew then that she was being followed by something that wasn't human. Story number 52. Maggie had always been a skeptic when it came to the supernatural, but that changed when she inherited an old house from her great-grandmother. As she was exploring the dusty attic, she came across a mysterious locked chest. When she finally managed to open it, she found an old journal filled with spells and incantations. Against her better judgment, she tried one of the spells, and suddenly the room was filled with a strange energy. She had opened a door to a world beyond her understanding. Story number 53. When Jake moved into his new apartment, he knew something was off. Every night, he heard strange noises coming from the walls. And then, one night, he saw them hundreds of tiny spiders crawling out of the cracks. He tried to get rid of them, but they kept coming back. And then, he realized that the spiders were just a symptom of a much larger problem. His apartment was cursed. Story number 54. Sophie loved going for long walks in the woods, but one day, she got lost. As she was wandering through the trees, she saw a strange figure in the distance. As she got closer, she realized that it was a woman with no face. The woman beckoned her closer, but Sophie knew better than to approach. She turned around to run, but the woman was already behind her. She was trapped in the woods with the faceless woman. Story number 55. Nate had always been fascinated by the supernatural, so when he heard about an abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town, he knew he had to investigate. As he was exploring the dark halls, he heard strange whispers coming from the shadows. And then, he saw her, a woman in a white dress, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. She beckoned him closer, and as he got closer, he saw that her face was twisted with rage. He had awakened a darkness that he couldn't control. Story number 56. Jenny had always been a skeptic when it came to the supernatural, but that changed when she started experiencing strange phenomena in her own home. Every night, she heard footsteps coming from the attic, but when she went up to investigate, there was no one there. And then, she started seeing figures in the shadows. She tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination, but deep down, she knew that something was watching her. Story number 57. Emily had always been afraid of the dark, but she never knew why. One night, as she was getting ready for bed, she saw a figure standing in the corner of her room. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but as she got closer, she saw that it was a man with no face. He beckoned her closer, but Emily knew better than to approach. She turned around to run, but the man was already behind her. She was trapped in her own home with the faceless man. Story number 58. The old man who lived at the end of the street always seemed a little strange, but no one suspected just how strange until the day he passed away. As his house was being cleared out, his family discovered a hidden room filled with strange artifacts and ancient tomes. But the most chilling discovery was a diary that chronicled his experiments with dark magic and the summoning of otherworldly beings. It was then that they realized that the old man's eccentricities were more than just harmless quirks. Story number 59. As a child, I had an imaginary friend who I thought was just a product of my own imagination. But as I got older, I started to realize that there was something off about her. She never had a name, and she always seemed to know things she shouldn't. One day, I asked her who she was, and she replied with a name that sent shivers down my spine. It was the name of a girl who had died in my house years before I was born. I knew then that my imaginary friend was more than just a figment of my imagination. Story number 60. I always thought that the old abandoned mansion on the hill was just a relic of the past. But then, one day, I heard a strange sound coming from inside. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. As I walked through the dusty rooms, I could feel a presence watching me from the shadows. And then, I saw her, a woman in a white dress, her hair falling over her face. She was holding a porcelain doll, and as she approached me, I saw that its eyes were following me. And then, just as suddenly as she appeared, she vanished into thin air. But I knew then that the house was far from abandoned.